communicate over distance and can no longer move from community to community, I think we're done. You know, at that point we stay home and play poker, which is not my shared things. So I think at that point it would pretty much be reduced to local fights.
It's not just about not using the system. It's not just about like rejecting Burger King or bottled water. It's about taking back the mind share that the companies have over you. I mean, when you think about Burger King, it's because Burger King injected that to your mind. And the thing is, we should have a really strong conversation about the conservation of focus, the conservation of our mental resources, especially for all the warriors who are going to be fighting it. Because the thing is, we need focus. We need to take our minds away from how this civilization has habituated. Additionally, I think another thing that we need to talk about is, well, what are we going to do about colleges? I mean, colleges are great sources to educate people who are interested in doing things. But it's also a great source of worker, what colleges are only for is producing work. And things need to change. There was always that sales note on the college system in California. Moral centers of community. But that's not true at all. And it needs to become true. And we need to, I think us in colleges need to really work towards that. So I'd like to hear from, I'd like this to be a discussion from all the speakers.
Lier is looking at me like a deer in the headlights, like, please don't make me go back on stage again. We're supposed to repeat the question.
I guess, what should you do to make colleges become the moral centers of communities that they're supposed to be, instead of producing evil scientists and workers and elites?
Which, by the way, I graduated from the Colorado School of Mines, and it doesn't get any more evil than that. I mean, it is. They educate the evil technocrats. I went to the other day. I went to my college alumni website just to. It's kind of funny. A lot of people go to those reunion websites to gloat over, like the males will go to gloat over the other people's male pattern baldness. I was going to gloat over their male pattern badness because most of my fellow graduates are like vice presidents of oil companies now. It's really, really scary, which is just an anecdote. I'll leave the real work to you.
Well, I mean, this system of colleges here is different from India, though it's getting there, but basically, increasingly, I think corporates are funding colleges and then setting the agenda for the education. And obviously, that just has to stop. You know, that you can't have corporate companies deciding the pedagogy in a college. Obviously, it's going to, it's going to change things. In places like India, you have organizations like the Ford Foundation who have a sort of benign self-image, who fund a lot of courses other than companies like the Tatas and so on. And but the thing is that they just slowly train people to be creatures of the free market. That you just get funded if you do this, and you don't get funded if you do that, and so you might as well do this. And so, forgetting about pharmaceutical companies paying for research in drugs and all of that. So the conflict of interest is so huge that it's once again it's almost humiliating to be put into that system, and for most people not even to know that they are in that system. So obviously colleges would have to be returned to being publicly funded institutions. And of course we're not even talking about student loans and the fact that you have to take huge loans to get this corporate education and then not get a job and then get stuck with having to repay the loan.
There's a reason that when the democracies of Central and South America were destroyed by U.S. and corporate interests, that one of the places that they would hit first would be universities. Because one of the great things that a university can provide is this incendiary mix of people who have had the leisure to theorize with people who have directly felt the iron boot of oppression on their necks. That there can be this absolutely incendiary combination then of theory and reality. I'm just going to say that it's incendiary, but I've said that 3 times now. And those in power have known, this is pretty interesting, I haven't thought of this before. The first part I have, the second part I have. Those in power have recognized that, and so we got in Central and South America and in Mexico sort of the colonial model of how that works for repression in terms of just cops going in to the university. And then in the United States, you get the United States version, which is privatization and the free market. We're not going to shoot you, we're going to pay you to go the other direction.
In India now, education has become one of the biggest rackets, because as the government pulls back on public spending of health as well as education, you have these sort of fly-by-night institutions of business management and hotel management and so on, and people who just about entered the middle class because of this whole free market thing, have children who live in rough neighborhoods, who are, and they are just so terrified of their children, turning bad, that they pay a lot of money to get them into these institutions which basically teach nothing, and they get into debt. But these institutions, you imagine millions of middle-class people, how much money they vacuum up. So, and that's the same with hospitals and clinics and so on. So, it's quite a frightening scenario.
Okay. Yeah, we're running out of time, so we're going to do one more question, and then there's 2 extremely short announcements. So you have to choose who the last one is to.
I'm not sure.
Well, okay. Here's the deal. It has to be a woman. We'll go with that.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do 2 then, since you're going to pick one over there. And then we'll do one. So you pick one over there, I'll do one here.
Yes.
I'm kind of curious about anything that you can say about the role of Indian Americans, South Asian Americans, in supporting the disease efforts in India.
Well, so the question was if Indian Americans can do anything to support indigenous resistance in India. Well, first of all, I must clarify that indigenous resistance is not the only kind of resistance that's happening. You know, there's all kinds of resistance, and the project of neoliberal privatization is not only affecting indigenous people. Now, the fact is that I think a majority of Indian Americans, particularly, you know, the IT, the information technology populations in Silicon Valley, and generally the Indians who study and live in America are very much part of an elite, and a lot of them do act politically, but in supporting the right, in supporting the right-wing Hindutva project. So most of the time when I write, you know, in a magazine or something, the letters that come saying that she should be hanged or she should be jailed, you know, from Champaign-Urbana or whatever. There's a lot of activity like that goes on, which I'm sure people like yourself could work to counter, you know, to just because there's such a lot of sort of vicious stuff that goes on the web that comes out of here. It's almost like a Hindu Zionist, you know. You have to, you know. But other than that, you know, I don't have any general answer to that question, because there was a time when I, you know, at the time when there were, you know, the beginning of the World Social Forum and things, when I did think that sort of solidarities, international solidarities, you know, was something that we should put a lot of energy into. But then I realized that half the best activists are just turned into travel agents, you know, and they were like organizing the World Social Forum, which then quickly became NGOized, you know. So I would say that, you know, it's also not necessary to think in terms of I'm an Indian American and what can I do for India. I think what you can do here in the place where you live is just as important, you know. Because sometimes I don't any longer know what we mean when we say India, because I keep saying that the most successful secessionist movement in India has been the secession of the middle and upper classes into outer space, you know, where they sort of look down at the people and they say, what's our bauxite doing in their mountains, and what's our water doing in their rivers, and how can we get it out? And they sort of colluded with the elite and the rest of the world. And certainly, you know, one of the, you know, the Indian elite considers itself you know, one part of America in some ways, you know. It was one of the few countries where George Bush was very popular among the elite. So I don't really think in those ways anymore, you know, nationalistically. I think we should just do what we can where we are.
Okay, so we have one more question, and then I have a very quick announcement, and then there's two other announcements. And then,
as we're ending, I just want to say thank you. It's a great honor to be learning from the two of you together. It's a dream come true for me to have like two of my personal heroes on stage at the same time. My question is, a lot of us here already know we need to exist, but we don't know how, we're scared, we're finding a way to plug in. And I keep thinking there of the story that you tell about Dolores Argento. And I was hoping maybe you could say something about that, about those who thought.
Yeah, I think that would be on. It's just that I mentioned earlier that, the question was, she said that it's so wonderful and an honor. And she said all sorts of great things about us. Can you repeat those? I want to repeat those word for word. Anyway, and then she asked if I could repeat something that I've said about the Warsaw Ghetto. And remember earlier I mentioned that Zygmunt Bauman talks about how one of the smartest things the Nazis did was they made it so that at every step of the way it was in the Jews' rational best interest to not resist. And I went through the various things, like if you want to get an ID card, you want to resist and possibly get killed, etc., etc. And when I normally tell that story, the end of that story is that, but I'll tell you something very important, which is that the Jews who participated in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising had a higher rate of survival than those who went alone. The Jews who participated in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising had a higher rate of survival than those who went alone. No, listen. The Jews who participated in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising had a higher rate of survival than those who went alone. Keep that in mind over the next 10 years.